There are decisions that shape a lifetime. Thomas Reed had refused to open his door once, and it killed his family. This winter, a second chance was knocking. December 1886. Montana's Bitterroot Valley lay buried beneath snow that seemed to have no end. The kind of cold that didn't announce itself with drama or fanfare. It simply arrived, settling into the bones of the land like an old debt finally come due. Fence posts wore white crowns. The sky hung low and gray, pregnant with the promise of more to come. Even sound seemed reluctant to travel, as if the air itself had grown weary of carrying weight. Thomas Reed stood inside his cabin, fingers wrapped around a tin cup that had gone cold hours ago. He was 46 years old, though the mirror suggested older. 7 winters of solitude did that to a man. 7 winters of asking the same question every morning. Why them, and not me? The stove had burned down to embers sometime before dawn. He hadn't bothered to feed it. Cold was honest. It didn't pretend to be anything else. It didn't make promises it couldn't keep. Outside, wind pushed against the cabin walls, testing them the way it always did. The land wanted to know who still had the right to stay. On the rough-hewn table sat a photograph, its edges worn from handling. Sarah, his wife, stood in a summer dress that seemed to belong to a different world. Emma, his daughter, 8 years old forever, held a rag doll and smiled at something beyond the frame. The photograph was 7 years old. The people in it had been dead just as long. Thomas set down the cup. The sound of ceramic touching wood felt too loud in the silence. That's when he heard it. A knock. Not loud, not confident, just knuckles against wood. Hesitant, almost apologetic. The kind of knock that expected rejection. Winter travelers didn't knock. They shouted, they begged, or they collapsed before reaching a door. A knock meant someone still had dignity left to lose. Thomas froze. His breath misted in the cold air. The knock came again, softer this time, as if whoever stood outside was already losing faith, already preparing to walk back into the white. He reached for his coat, shrugging into it with movements made stiff by cold and hesitation. He did not take his rifle. He did not take his knife. Some part of him, buried deep, wanted to believe this moment might be different. He approached the door like a man stepping toward a memory he had sworn to bury. When he opened it, wind rushed in first, sharp and biting, carrying with it the smell of snow and something older. Fear. An old Apache woman stood on his porch. She was wrapped in a threadbare shawl, its edges stiff with frost. Snow clung to her hair, white tangled with black. Her face was carved deep with years, with sun, with loss. 67 winters had passed through her, and every one of them showed. One hand was raised, still half curled from knocking, trembling now that the door had opened. Beside her stood 2 girls. They could not have been more than 12 and 9. Their boots were cracked, their dresses too thin for Montana winter. The older one clutched the younger one's sleeve as if letting go might cause the world to tilt and spill them into nothing. The old woman lifted her chin. Pride and exhaustion warred in the same breath. "We knocked at 7 doors," she said. Her English was slow, careful, worn down by years of being misunderstood. "All closed. Will you close yours too?" The wind cut between them. One of the girls shivered violently, her lips touched with blue. The older girl didn't ask. She didn't plead. She simply watched Thomas as if already preparing to remember his answer for the rest of her life. Thomas felt something stir in his chest, something inconvenient, something dangerous. Memory crashed over him. Another family, another winter. 7 years ago. Different faces, but the same desperation. An Apache family had stood at his barn door asking for shelter. Thomas had said no. He told himself it was about disease, about protecting Sarah and Emma from whatever sickness the travelers might carry. His friend Marcus Vaughn had been there that night, reinforcing the fear. "Better safe than sorry," Marcus had said. "Your family comes first." So Thomas closed the door. 2 weeks later, Sarah and Emma caught fever from someone in town. The doctor said it was bad luck, the kind of thing that just happened. Thomas knew better. He knew the universe kept accounts. He had chosen fear over mercy, and mercy had abandoned him in return. Now, standing in the same cold, facing the same choice, Thomas felt 7 years of grief crystallize into a single moment of clarity. He stepped aside. "Come in," he said. The words fell heavy into the cold. Not kind, not cruel, just final. For a moment, no one moved. Then the old woman exhaled one long breath she had been holding for miles and guided the girls forward. They crossed the threshold, as if crossing water they weren't sure would hold. Warmth hit them all at once, thin but real, the smell of old wood and ash and coffee grounds. The youngest girl stumbled, legs weak. Thomas caught her elbow automatically, steadying her without thinking. She flinched at first, then relaxed, leaning into the support before she realized she was doing it. The door shut behind them with a soft, decisive thud. Winter stayed outside. Thomas moved toward the stove, already feeding kindling into the embers. The fire caught slowly, reluctant, like everything else in winter. But it caught. "You'll warm up," he said. Slow. The old woman nodded. She guided the girls closer to the fire, lowering herself to the floor with a quiet groan her pride tried to hide. The girls huddled together, hands extended toward heat they weren't sure they deserved. Thomas filled a kettle at the pump and set it on the stove. The sound of water sloshing felt loud in the quiet. He could feel their eyes on his back. Not suspicious, not grateful, just alert. The way animals watched when they learned too young that stillness kept you alive. He poured hot water into chipped cups and handed them over one by one. The girls took theirs carefully, as if afraid the warmth might be a trick. The old woman cradled hers, but did not drink immediately. "My name is Aita," she said finally. "These are my daughter's daughters." The phrase landed heavy. Daughters, daughters. Grief layered deep in those words. "Elias," Thomas replied. Then, after a pause, "Thomas Reed." The older girl looked up at him. "Why did you help us?" Thomas met her eyes. "Because I didn't help someone once, and I lost everything." The girls studied him, processing this. The younger one drank her water in small, careful sips. "You have kind eyes," the little one said suddenly. Her voice was small but clear. "Like my papa." Thomas felt his throat tighten. He turned back to the stove, pretending to adjust the fire. Aiti spoke again. "We are running. From Fort Apache Reservation. They say we stole food from the warehouse." "Did you?" "We took food they were going to throw away. Food already spoiled that they would not give us when it was good." Her voice carried no apology. "My son Grey Wolf died 18 months ago trying to protect his family. These girls are all I have left." Thomas nodded once. "I lost my wife and daughter 7 years ago." The cabin settled into silence. The fire grew stronger, crackling with new purpose. Outside, snow began to fall again, slow and deliberate. The older girl finally spoke. "My name is Kaya. This is my sister, Mika." "You're watching the doors," Thomas observed, "and the windows." Kaya's eyes sharpened. "You've had to run before, too." "Once," Thomas said. "Long time ago." As the night deepened, Thomas moved through the cabin with quiet efficiency. He pulled down an old quilt from a hook near the loft ladder. It smelled faintly of cedar and Sarah's lavender soap. He draped it around the girls. Kaya stiffened it first, then allowed it, tucking it around Mika with careful hands. "This was warm," Mika whispered, touching the fabric. "Someone loved this." "Yes," Thomas said. His voice barely carried. "Someone did." Aita began to hum, low and rhythmic. Not a song Thomas recognized, but it carried the weight of something passed down through generations. Something that survived winter after winter. Mika's eyes grew heavy. Her shoulders finally relaxed. She leaned against Kaya, and both girls began to drift. "You should not have opened your door," Aita said quietly, once the girls' breathing had evened out. Thomas leaned against the table. "Maybe. They punish men who help us. You must know this." "I've heard." She studied him for a long moment, then nodded as if confirming something she had already suspected. "My son believed in mercy too. He thought the cold would be kinder than the guns. He was wrong." The fire popped. A log shifted. "Cold doesn't choose," Thomas said. "People do." Aita's mouth curved. Not quite a smile. Something sharper, sadder. "You have already chosen. They will come." "I know. And you will not give us back?" "No." She placed a hand over her heart, a gesture heavy with meaning. "Then we are bound now, for good or for worse." Thomas looked at the girls sleeping by the fire, at Aita's weathered face, at the photograph of Sarah and Emma on the table. 7 years of asking why. Maybe this was the answer. Not redemption exactly. Nothing so clean. But a chance to choose differently. A chance to be the man Sarah had believed he could be. "There's a pass," he said. "North of here. Ridge Pass. Hard in winter, but I know it. Other side is Idaho. Marshall there is fair. Fairer than Montana, anyway." Aita's eyes sharpened. "That pass kills people. So does staying here." The wind howled outside, a long, sustained note that made the cabin walls creak. Thomas stood and moved to the window, peering through frost-glazed glass at the darkness beyond. That's when he saw them. Tracks in the snow. Fresh. Circling the cabin. Someone had been here, recently, watching. He opened the door just enough to step onto the porch. Cold slammed into him like a fist. There, nailed to the porch post, was a piece of paper, already stiffening in the freeze. Thomas pulled it free and brought it inside. The words were scrawled in familiar handwriting. "Fugitives inside. $200 reward. Surrender before sunrise or be considered accomplice." It was signed Sheriff M. Vaughn. Thomas stared at the signature. Marcus Vaughn. His old friend. The man who'd helped him build this cabin. The man who'd stood beside him at Sarah's grave. The man who'd told him not to help that Apache family 7 years ago. "You know this person," Aita said. She had risen silently, reading over his shoulder. "I used to." "What changed?" Thomas crumpled the paper slowly. "He did. Or maybe I did. Hard to say." "He will come at dawn." "Yes." "We should leave now." "No." Thomas moved to the gun rack, taking down his rifle. We leave before dawn, while it's still dark. But first, I need to prepare. Kaya woke, alert immediately. What's wrong? Men are coming, Thomas said, but we'll be gone before they arrive. The girl's face hardened. She was 12 years old, but her eyes were older. They always come. Thomas knelt in front of her. Not this time. This time, we're ready. He spent the next hour moving through preparations with quiet purpose. He packed supplies into a canvas sack. Dried meat, hardtack, coffee, matches wrapped in oilcloth. He filled 2 canteens. He loaded his rifle and tucked extra ammunition into his coat. He wrapped blankets tight and bound them with rope. Kaya watched every movement, learning. You're not just running, she observed. You're planning. Running without a plan just means you die tired, Thomas replied. As false dawn began to gray the eastern sky, Thomas led them out the back door. Snow muffled their footsteps. The world was silent, except for wind and their own breathing, misting white in the cold. They'd gone perhaps 50 yards when Thomas heard it. Horses, multiple riders, coming from the direction of town. Into the trees, he whispered. They pressed themselves against the dark trunks of lodgepole pines. Through the falling snow, Thomas watched as 4 riders approached his cabin. Even in the dim light, he recognized the lead horse, Marcus Vaughn. The riders stopped at the front door. Vaughn dismounted, walked to the porch, and pounded on the door. When no answer came, he tried the handle, locked. "Thomas Reed," Vaughn's voice carried across the snow. "I know you're in there. I saw smoke from the chimney at midnight." Silence. Vaughn kicked the door. Once. Twice. On the 3rd kick, it splintered open. The riders entered. Thomas counted slowly. 1 minute. 2. Then they emerged. "Gone," one of them said. A younger man, hard-faced. "Fire's still warm. They left recent." Vaughn scanned the tree line. For a moment, Thomas was certain those eyes landed directly on him. Then Vaughn turned back to his men. "Track them," he said. $100 to whoever brings them back. $200 if they're alive." The men mounted up, but before they could start searching for tracks, another rider appeared. This one older, better dressed. Even from a distance, Thomas recognized the bearing of wealth and power. Silas Rutherford, the biggest landowner in 3 counties. "Well?" Rutherford's voice was cold and clipped. "They ran," Vaughn replied. "Then why are you standing here? It's dark. Easy to lose the trail. I want to wait for better light." "I'm not paying you to be cautious, Vaughn. I'm paying you for results." Rutherford leaned down from his horse. "Those Apache have been squatting on land I purchased. They need to be gone. Permanently, if necessary." "You said capture them." "I'm saying do whatever is required. I'll double your pay. $1,000 if this is finished by week's end." Vaughn was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded. "Understood." Rutherford rode off. Vaughn turned to his men. "You heard him. Find them. Kill them if you have to. But I want this done." One of the younger riders, sandy-haired and nervous-looking, spoke up. "Even the children?" "Especially the children," Vaughn replied. "Children grow up." Thomas felt Aita's hand on his arm, squeezing hard. Felt Mika trembling against his leg. Felt Kaya's small hand slip into his, gripping tight. He had opened his door to save them. Now he would have to fight to keep them alive. The riders began to fan out, searching for tracks. Thomas moved silently, leading his small group deeper. Every crack of a branch, every crunch of snow underfoot seemed amplified, betraying their position. But the falling snow helped. "We can't outrun them," Kaya said. She spoke matter-of-factly, like someone reporting weather. "Not for long." Thomas studied the girl. 12 years old, but already thinking tactically. Already understanding the math of pursuit and evasion. "No," he agreed. "We can't." "Then what?" "We make them slow down." He unslung his pack and began pulling items out. Rope, a knife, several tin cans he'd grabbed from the cabin. Kaya watched with sharp interest. "You're setting traps," she said. "Simple ones. Nothing that'll kill. Just things that'll make them cautious. Make them think twice about pushing hard." Thomas tied rope between two trees at ankle height, disguising it with snow. "Caution buys us time." "Teach me." Thomas glanced at Aita. The old woman nodded once. For the next 20 minutes, Thomas showed Kaya how to set basic deterrents, how to create false trails, how to use terrain and shadow to confuse pursuers. The girl learned quickly, her hands nimble despite the cold. When they moved on, they left behind a forest that looked untouched, but was laced with small obstacles. Nothing deadly, just enough to make riders think, just enough to plant seeds of doubt. They pushed north for another hour. The land began to rise, foothills giving way to true mountain country. The trees thinned, the wind picked up, cutting through layers of clothing like they were nothing. Thomas was scouting ahead when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong. He raised his fist, and the group froze instantly. Kaya had learned that signal fast. Through the trees, perhaps 50 yards distant, came a figure. A man, moving slowly, favoring one leg. As he drew closer, Thomas recognized him. One of Vaughn's riders. The sandy-haired young one who'd questioned killing children. The man hadn't seen them yet. He was tracking, eyes down, following footprints that led off to the west. One of the false trails Thomas had created. Thomas could let him pass, could stay hidden and silent. But something in the way the man moved, the way he kept looking back over his shoulder, made Thomas hesitate. The man stopped, pulled out a canteen, took a long drink. Then he did something unexpected. He kicked snow over the footprints he'd been following, deliberately erasing the trail. Thomas stepped out from cover. His rifle came up smooth and steady. The man spun, hand going to his gun. Then he saw Thomas and froze, saw the rifle aimed at his chest, saw behind Thomas the shapes of Aita and the girls emerging from the trees. "Don't," Thomas said quietly. The man's hand moved away from his weapon, slowly, carefully. He was young, Thomas saw now, mid-20s maybe, old enough to know better, young enough to still have choices. "You were erasing our trail," Thomas observed. The young man swallowed hard. "I was." "Why?" "Because what Vaughn's doing isn't right." The words came out in a rush. "I signed on to track fugitives, not murder children." When he said that, about the children growing up, I knew I couldn't be part of it. "So you're what? Switching sides?" "I'm trying to give you a chance." The man looked past Thomas to the girls. "I got a little sister about that age, back in Kansas. I can't do this. I won't." Aita moved forward. She studied the young man's face, with eyes that had seen more lies than he'd lived years. Finally, she nodded. "He speaks truth," she said. Thomas lowered the rifle slightly. "What's your name?" Samuel. Samuel Cooper. How many men does Vaughn have? 4, including me. Well, 3 now, I guess. There's Vaughn, a man named Hartley, who's meaner than a snake, and one other. Rutherford promised them $1,000 each if they bring you all in dead. Mika gasped. Kaya's face went hard. Not capture anymore? Thomas asked. No, sir. Rutherford wants this done quiet. Bodies are quieter than witnesses. Thomas was quiet for a long moment, thinking. Finally, he made a decision. You got a horse? Yeah, tied back about a quarter mile. Get on it. Ride to Salmon, Idaho. There's a marshal there named Peter Douglas. Tell him what's happening. Tell him Thomas Reed is bringing in witnesses to murder conspiracy and needs backup. Samuel nodded quickly. I can do that, but it's 3 days to Salmon in good weather, maybe 4 in this. Then you better ride fast. What about you? We're going up and over Ridge Pass. It's the only way to reach Idaho before Vaughn catches us. Samuel's face went pale. That pass killed 6 people last winter. The snow gets so deep up there, the wind so strong, you can't tell up from down. I know. You'll die. Maybe, but we'll definitely die if we stay down here. Thomas gestured to the west. Now go. And Samuel? Thank you. The young man met his eyes. Some silent understanding passed between them. Samuel turned and disappeared into the trees, moving quickly now, purpose in every step. Aita watched him go. You trust him? I trust that he believes what he said. Whether that holds when things get hard, we'll find out. They moved on. They'd gone perhaps another mile when a figure stepped out from behind a massive pine. An older native man, 60 years at least, wearing Nez Perce clothing. He held no weapon, hands visible and open. Thomas's rifle came up. Hold! The man stopped. Peace. My name is Joseph Blackfeather. I've been tracking Vaughn's group for 2 days. Why? Thomas asked, not lowering his weapon. Because 10 years ago, my brother died trying to cross Ridge Pass in winter. Froze to death up there. Joseph's face was weathered, sad. I know the safe route, the route that doesn't kill. And I heard you're trying to cross. Aita studied him. You would help us? Why? Because I couldn't save my brother. But maybe I can save you. Joseph looked at the girls. And because children shouldn't die for the greed of men like Rutherford. Thomas lowered his rifle slowly. You know the pass? Every stone, every danger, every place where the ice is thin and the snow hides death. Joseph smiled grimly. I've crossed it 6 times. 5 times I made it. Once I had to turn back. And you'll guide us? If you'll have me. Thomas looked at Aita. She nodded. All right, Thomas said. But if you're lying, then the mountain will kill us all anyway, Joseph finished. I gain nothing from betrayal except more death. I've seen enough of that. The land climbed steeper now. Snow gave way to ice in places, treacherous footing that required careful attention. Twice Mika slipped. Twice Kaya caught her. The second time, Thomas saw tears freeze on the younger girl's face. He stopped and knelt in front of Mika. You're doing good, little one. I'm slowing everyone down, she whispered. No, you're keeping up. That's different. Thomas pulled a piece of dried apple from his pocket. He'd been saving it, but now seemed the right time. Here, sugar helps. Mika took it with trembling fingers. The sweetness brought a ghost of a smile to her face. Kaya watched the exchange with something like hunger, not for the food, for the kindness, for the moment of normalcy in a world that had offered her precious little of either. "When this is over," Kaya said quietly, "when we're safe, will you teach me to shoot? Really shoot, not just the basics?" "Why?" "Because I never want to run again. I want to be able to stand." Thomas saw Aita close her eyes briefly, saw the pain there. A grandmother watching a granddaughter lose innocence that should never be lost at 12. "Yeah," Thomas said, "I'll teach you." They crested a ridge as afternoon light began to fail. Below, through a gap in the trees, Thomas could see smoke, thin gray columns rising from what might be a camp. He pulled out a small spyglass, extended it, focused. 3 men around a fire. He recognized Vaughn's silhouette immediately. Recognized the way the man moved, even at this distance. The other 2 had to be Hartley and the 4th rider. They were less than a mile behind now, and they'd stopped, which meant they'd lost the trail or were regrouping. Either way, it bought time. "There's a hollow ahead," Aita said. She pointed to a depression in the landscape, barely visible through falling snow. "Natural shelter. We could rest there." Thomas nodded. They needed rest badly. Had been moving for 8 hours with only brief stops. Mika was stumbling now, Kaya supporting more of her weight with each step. The hollow was better than expected. A small cave, really, carved by ancient water into granite. Deep enough to block wind. Dry enough to risk a tiny fire. Thomas gathered deadwood, while Aita arranged stones for a fire ring. Kaya helped Mika out of her wet outer layer, wrapping her in the driest blanket they had. The girl was shivering hard now, that deep trembling that came before real cold set in. "We need to warm her," Thomas said. "Fire will give away our position," Aita replied. "Hypothermia will kill her faster than Vaughn." Aita nodded. Thomas struck flint to steel, coaxed flame from tinder, fed it carefully until warmth began to push back the cold. They kept it small, letting smoke dissipate through cracks in the cave roof rather than billowing out the entrance. Mika huddled close to the flames, color slowly returning to her face. Kaya sat beside her, one arm around her sister's shoulders. "Tell me a story, grandmother," Mika said quietly. "Like you used to." Aita smiled. It was the first real smile Thomas had seen from her. "What story would you hear?" "The one about Coyote and the stars." "That is a long story." "We have time." Aita glanced at Thomas. He nodded. They had a few hours before they needed to move again, and the girl needed something other than fear to think about. So Aita spoke. Her voice took on a different quality, something musical and old. She told of Coyote, who was clever but also foolish, who wanted to understand why stars existed. The story wound through lessons about curiosity and consequence, about learning and growing. Thomas found himself drawn in, despite everything. Found himself remembering Sarah telling Emma bedtime stories in much the same way. When Aita finished, Mika had stopped shivering. Her eyes were heavy but peaceful. "Did Coyote learn?" she asked. "Coyote always learns," Aita said. "But Coyote also always forgets and must learn again. That is the way of things." Kaya spoke up. "I wish Papa was here. He would know what to do." "Your father taught you what to do," Aita said firmly. "He taught you to be strong, to be smart, to protect your sister. You are doing all these things." "But I'm scared." "Good. Fear keeps you alert. It is not weakness to be afraid. It is wisdom." Thomas added wood to the fire, keeping it small. Your grandmother's right. Bravery isn't not being scared. It's being scared and doing what needs doing anyway. Kaya looked at him. Were you scared when you opened your door? Terrified. Of us? Of making the wrong choice again. Thomas paused, deciding how much to share. 7 years ago, a family came to my door. Apache, like you. It was winter, like this. They needed help. And I said no. The cave went quiet, except for the fire crackle. Why? Kaya asked. Because I was afraid. Afraid of disease, of trouble, of things I didn't understand. A man I trusted told me I was right to be afraid. So I closed my door. Thomas stared into the flames. 2 weeks later, my wife and daughter caught fever from someone in town. They died. And I learned that fear doesn't protect you. It just makes you smaller. The man who told you to be afraid, Aita said slowly. Was that Vaughn? Thomas nodded. And now he hunts us. Yes. Life, Aita said, has a way of giving us chances to choose differently. This is yours. Outside, wind picked up. Snow fell heavier now, thick flakes that would cover the landscape by morning. Thomas stood and moved to the cave entrance, looking out at the gathering dark. Something moved in the tree line. He tensed, hand going to his rifle, then relaxed slightly. A deer, foraging for whatever it could find beneath the snow. It paused, looked directly at the cave, then moved on. Natural behavior, which meant no humans were near enough to spook it. We have maybe 4 hours, Thomas said, returning to the fire. Then we need to move. By dawn, we need to be at the base of Ridge Pass. And Vaughn? Kaya asked. He'll follow, but the pass is narrow, dangerous. Horses can't make it. They'll have to come on foot, same as us. That evens. It was summer then, barely managed it. In winter? He shook his head. But it's our only shot. They ate a cold meal, dried meat, hardtack, water from canteens they'd warmed by the fire. Not much, but enough to keep strength up. Thomas portioned carefully. They had food for maybe 3 days, if they were careful. 4, if they were willing to go hungry. As night deepened, they took turns keeping watch. Thomas took first shift, sitting at the cave entrance with his rifle across his knees. The world outside was a study in black and white. Dark trees against pale snow. Shadows within shadows. He thought about choices, about doors opened and closed, about second chances and whether anyone truly deserved them. Behind him, Mika whimpered in her sleep. Kaya's voice rose soft in comfort, speaking Apache words Thomas couldn't understand, but felt the meaning of. Care, protection, love. Family took many shapes. His shift ended. Aita rose to take the next watch. As they passed each other, she paused. My son would have liked you, she said quietly. Grey Wolf believed there were still good men in this world. I stopped believing that when he died. You are making me reconsider. Thomas didn't know what to say to that, so he simply nodded and moved to the fire to rest. He didn't sleep, couldn't. Too many thoughts, too many memories, too much at stake. An hour before dawn, a sound brought him fully alert. Footsteps, multiple, moving with purpose. Thomas and Aita locked eyes. She'd heard it too. They woke the girls silently, urgently, packed with quick efficiency. Through the cave entrance, Thomas saw lights, torches, 3 of them, coming up the slope. They found us, Kaya whispered. Back of the cave, Thomas ordered. There's a crack in the rock. Squeeze through if you can. I'll hold them here. No, Aita's voice was steel. We stay together. Grandmother, we should go, Kaya urged. She's right, Thomas said. I can buy you time. Aita turned to him. Her eyes, in the dim light, were fierce. We are bound now, Thomas Reed, for good or worse. We do not leave our people behind. That is our way. The lights drew closer. Thomas could hear voices now. Vaughan's, commanding. Another man's, eager and cruel. That would be Hartley. Into the back then, Thomas decided, but quietly. And if I say run, you run. They moved deeper into the cave. The crack Aita had mentioned was barely visible, a seam in the granite that might lead to another chamber or might lead nowhere. But it was cover. The torchlight spilled into the cave entrance. I know you're in there, Thomas, Vaughan's voice echoed off stone. I can smell the smoke. Come out and maybe I'll let the old woman live. Thomas said nothing. Let Vaughan's words hang in the air, unanswered. I'm giving you a chance here, Vaughan continued. More than you gave me 7 years ago, when you let your family die because you were too proud to listen to sense. That hit like a physical blow. Thomas felt rage rise hot in his chest. That's right, Vaughan pressed. I tried to save you, tried to protect you from those disease-carrying savages. But you blamed me for doing the right thing. And now look at you, throwing your life away for the same kind of people. You told me to close my door, Thomas called back. His voice was steady, despite the anger. You planted the fear. You made me think mercy was weakness. Mercy is weakness. It gets people killed. No, Marcus. Fear is weakness, and you're swimming in it. Silence. Then Vaughan's voice came back, colder. Last chance, Thomas. Send them out, or we come in. Thomas looked at Aita and the girls pressed into the crack in the rock. Looked at their faces, pale in the darkness. Thought about all the choices that had led to this moment. Come ahead then, he called. But it'll cost you. The torches went out suddenly, tactical, smart. They'd be coming in dark now, using the cave entrance as a kill funnel. But Thomas had spent 2 hours in this cave. He knew every stone, every angle, and he'd been preparing. The sound of boots on stone, careful, slow. Thomas sighted down his rifle at the entrance, waiting. A shape appeared. Backlit by pre-dawn gray, Thomas fired. The shot was deafening in the enclosed space. The figure dropped, crying out. Not dead. Thomas had aimed low, hitting the leg. He didn't want to kill if he could avoid it. Return fire erupted. Bullets sparked off granite, ricocheting wildly. Thomas pressed himself flat against the cave wall, letting stone protect him. Hartley's hit, someone shouted. Then drag him back, Vaughan roared. And bring the damn torches! Thomas reloaded. His hands were steady, automatic from years of practice. He had 8 shots left. After that, it became a knife fight. The shapes retreated. Hartley was pulled out, cursing and bleeding. Thomas could hear them arguing outside. We can wait them out, one voice suggested. We don't have time, Vaughan snapped. By afternoon that pass will be impossible. We take them now or lose them. Then smoke them out. There was a pause. Thomas felt his stomach drop. Do it, Vaughan ordered. Within minutes, smoke began drifting into the cave. They'd piled wet wood at the entrance and set it burning. The thick white smoke filled the space quickly, stinging eyes, making breathing difficult. Mika began to cough. Kaya tried to muffle the sound, but it carried. We have to go deeper, Aita said. Through the crack. Thomas nodded. He couldn't hold this position much longer anyway. They moved backward, squeezing through the narrow opening one by one. It was tight, claustrophobic. Thomas had to turn sideways to fit his shoulders through. On the other side was a smaller chamber. No other exit. A dead end. "I'm sorry," Thomas said. "I led us into a trap." "No," Aitita replied. "You gave us a chance. That is more than anyone else has done." The smoke was seeping through the crack now. They'd be forced out within minutes. That's when Kaya pointed up. "Look!" Above them, barely visible, was another crack in the ceiling. Narrower, but through it came fresh air, cold air. "Can we fit?" Thomas asked. "I can," Kaya said. "And Mika, maybe grandmother." "And me?" Kaya looked at his broad shoulders and shook her head. Thomas understood. He could boost them up. They could escape while he held off Vaughn. At least 3 of them might make it. He knelt down. "Kaya first. Then you help pull Mika up. Then your grandmother." "What about you?" Mika asked, her voice small. Thomas smiled. It felt strange on his face, like a muscle he'd forgotten how to use. "I'll be right behind you." It was a lie, and they all knew it. Aita gripped his shoulder. "You have given us life, Thomas Reed. We will not forget." "Just get them safe," Thomas said. "That's all I ask." He boosted Kaya up. The girl was light, agile. She grabbed the edges of the crack and pulled herself through with surprising strength. A moment later, her hand reached back down. "Mika, grab my hand!" Thomas lifted the younger girl. She was crying silently, looking back at him with huge eyes. "It's okay," he told her. "You're going to be fine. You're going to grow up and have a good life. Promise me you'll do that." "I promise," she whispered. Then she was gone, pulled up into darkness. Aita was last. She looked at Thomas for a long moment. "In our tradition," she said, "when someone saves your life, they become family. You are family now, Thomas Reed. And family does not leave family behind." Before he could respond, she was climbing. Her aged body moved with determination born of necessity. Kaya and Mika pulled from above. Slowly, painfully, Aita squeezed through the crack. Thomas stood alone in the small chamber. Smoke was thick now. He could hear Vaughn and his remaining man coming through the outer cave. He had 6 bullets left. Might take 1 down, maybe both if he was lucky. Then he heard it, from above, a voice calling down. "Thomas, there's a ledge. You can make it." He looked up, saw Kaya's face peering down through the crack. "I'm too big," he said. "Try. Please try." The smoke was choking now. He could hear boots on stone, getting closer. Thomas holstered his rifle and jumped, grabbed the edges of the crack, pulled. His shoulders wedged immediately. He was stuck, hanging half in, half out. "Pull!" Aita commanded from above. 3 sets of hands grabbed his arms, his coat, anything they could reach. He pushed with his legs, twisted his body, felt skin scrape off his shoulders as granite tore at him. And then, impossibly, he was through. He collapsed onto a narrow ledge. Above him, stars were visible through a wider opening. Cold air had never tasted so sweet. Below he heard Vaughn's roar of frustration echo through the cave. Aita was already moving. "There are handholds. We climb. Now." They climbed in darkness, feeling their way up granite made slick with ice. Once Mika slipped. Thomas caught her ankle, held her until she found purchase again. Once Thomas's grip failed. Kaya grabbed his wrist with surprising strength and held him until he could recover. "Family," Aita had said. And in this moment, climbing through darkness, pursued by death, Thomas understood what that meant. They emerged onto a snow-covered slope as the sun broke over the eastern peaks. Behind them, smoke rose from the cave entrance. Ahead, stark and terrible in the morning light, stood Ridge Pass. Vaughn's voice carried up from below, furious, promising vengeance. But they were out. They were free. For now. Thomas looked at his three companions, blood on his shirt from where granite had torn his skin, soot on all their faces, Mika barely able to stand from exhaustion. "Can you make the pass?" he asked Aita. The old woman looked at the mountain, then at her granddaughters, then at Thomas. "We have come this far," she said. "We will go the rest of the way." And they turned north, toward Ridge Pass, toward Idaho, toward whatever hope waited on the other side of winter. Behind them, Vaughn began to climb. The race was far from over. The mountain had no mercy. Ridge Pass rose before them like a judgment. Steep granite faces sheeted with ice. Snow so deep it erased the concept of trail or path. Wind that cut through wool and leather as if they were gauze. This was the kind of terrain that killed the unprepared. And even the prepared didn't always make it through. Thomas stood at the base, calculating. They had perhaps 2 hours before Vaughn emerged from the cave system and picked up their trail. 2 hours to gain enough altitude that pursuit became suicide. The problem was that climbing became suicide too. "There's no good choice here," he said aloud. Aita nodded. She understood. They all did. Stay low, and Vaughn caught them. Go high, and the mountain might kill them. But at least the mountain wasn't personal. At least winter didn't hate. "We climb," she said. They started up. The first hour was brutal. The slope angled at 40 degrees, requiring hands as much as feet. Snow gave way to ice beneath, treacherous and unforgiving. Mika fell twice in the first 20 minutes. The second time she cried out, a sharp sound of pain and fear that echoed off the rock faces. Thomas reached her quickly. She'd twisted her ankle, not badly, but enough to make each step agony. He could see it in the way she bit her lip, trying not to slow them down, trying to be brave. "We rest," he announced. "We don't have time," Kaya protested. "We make time. A broken ankle here means death. We do this smart, or we don't do it at all." They found a shelf of rock that offered minimal protection from the wind. Thomas examined Mika's ankle carefully. Swollen, but not broken. He wrapped it tight with strips torn from his own shirt, creating makeshift support. "Better?" he asked. Mika nodded, but tears tracked through the dirt on her face. Kaya sat beside her sister, their shoulders touching. "Remember what Papa used to say? Pain is just the body talking. Listen to it, but don't let it give orders." "Papa isn't here," Mika whispered. "No, but we are, and Thomas, and Grandmother. We're still here." Thomas distributed the last of the dried meat, small portions. They needed calories for warmth, for energy, but they also needed food to last. It was a balance with no right answer. Aita stared back down the slope. "They are coming." Thomas followed her gaze. Far below, perhaps a mile distant, 3 figures moved upward. Vaughn had lost Hartley to the gunshot wound, lost Samuel to conscience. But he'd gained something worse. Determination born of desperation. Men who'd gone this far rarely turned back. "How long?" Kaya asked. 90 minutes if they push hard, maybe 2 hours. "And how long to the top?" Thomas looked up at the pass. The summit was invisible from here. hidden by a curve of mountain and falling snow. But he remembered it from years ago, remembered the knife-edge ridge, the final scramble over wind-scoured rock. 4 hours, maybe 5. The math was simple and terrible. Vaughn would catch them before they reached the top. "Then we need an advantage," Aita said. Thomas studied the terrain. The mountain was steep here, funneling any climbers through narrow passages between rock faces. Choke points, places where one person could hold off several. An idea formed. Dangerous, maybe stupid, but possible. "I can slow them," he said. "Set up a position where they have to come through single file. Hold them long enough for you three to reach the summit. And then?" Kaya's eyes were too old for 12 years. She saw where this led. "Then you go down the other side. There's a shelter station about 2 miles past the summit, used by miners in summer. You get there, you're in Idaho. Marshal Douglas can help if Samuel reached him." "What about you?" Thomas was quiet for a moment. Then he smiled, and it wasn't entirely sad. "I'll catch up." Another lie. They all knew it. Aita shook her head firmly. "We discussed this. We do not abandon family." "You're not abandoning me. You're surviving. That's what matters. To you, perhaps, not to us." Before Thomas could argue, a sound drifted up from below, a voice calling. Vaughn's voice. "Thomas Reed, I know you can hear me." They froze, listening. "You can't make that pass, not in winter, not with children and an old woman. Be reasonable, man." Thomas said nothing. Sometimes silence was its own answer. "I'm offering you a deal," Vaughn continued. "You walk away, right now. Leave them and go. I'll give you 12 hours head start. By the time I'm done here, you'll be in Canada, free and clear." Mika's hand found Thomas's. Small fingers, cold even through gloves, gripping tight. "He thinks you will leave us," she whispered. "He doesn't know me anymore," Thomas replied. "Maybe he never did." They resumed climbing. The wind picked up as they gained altitude, carrying voices away before they could form words. The world narrowed to the next handhold, the next foothold, the next breath. Cold penetrated everything. Fingers went numb. Faces burned with wind chill. Still they climbed. An hour passed, then another. The sun, what little of it penetrated the clouds, began its descent toward the western peaks. They were racing darkness now as much as Vaughn. Joseph moved ahead of the group, testing the snow depth with a walking stick he'd cut from a pine branch. "This section is dangerous," he called back. "The snow hides crevasses. Follow my steps exactly. Don't deviate even an inch." They obeyed without question. Joseph's knowledge was already proving invaluable. He'd steered them around 2 hidden ice falls and found a route that cut significant time off their climb. During a brief rest, Kaya asked, "Your brother, what was his name?" "Standing Elk." Joseph's weathered face softened. "He was younger than me, stubborn. Tried this pass in the dead of winter because he'd promised his wife he'd be home for their son's birth." His voice grew distant. They found his body the next spring. Still standing somehow, frozen solid, one arm reaching toward Idaho, toward home. Mika pressed closer to Aita, frightened by the image. "I'm sorry," Thomas said quietly. "Don't be sorry. Be smart. That's how you honor the dead." Joseph stood, shouldering his pack. "Now come. The worst section is still ahead." That's when they found him. A body, partially covered in snow. A man, frozen in a half-sitting position against a boulder. He'd been dead for months at least, maybe years. His clothes marked him as a miner or prospector, someone who'd tried the pass and lost the gamble. Kaya stared at the corpse with wide eyes. Mika turned away, burying her face in Aita's coat. "This is the third one I've seen on this mountain," Thomas said quietly. "The past takes its price." "Comforting," Kaya said. Her voice shook slightly despite her attempt at dry humor. "No, but honest." Thomas searched the body quickly, found a knife, a flint striker, and, remarkably, a small leather pouch that still held 6 matches. And sometimes the dead help the living. They moved past the frozen sentinel. The wind shrieked louder here, channeled between rock faces into something that felt almost alive, almost intentional, as if the mountain was trying to push them back, to warn them away. Thomas called a halt at a narrow defile. Rock walls rose sheer on either side, creating a passage barely wide enough for one person at a time. Above, the walls curved in, forming a natural ceiling that blocked most of the snow. "This is the place," he said. Aita understood immediately. "You will stay here, long enough for you to reach the top. Then I follow." "Thomas," Kaya's voice was small, "don't lie to us. We're not children." He looked at her, at this girl who'd been forced to grow up too fast, who'd watched her father die, who carried her sister when that sister couldn't walk, who understood tactics and sacrifice and the cost of survival. "You're right," he said. "I'm sorry." "For what?" "For not being able to protect you all the way to the end." Kaya stepped forward and hugged him. It was brief, awkward. Neither of them was comfortable with physical affection. But it was real. "You gave us more than anyone else would," she said. "That's enough." Aita pressed something into his hand, a small carved stone, smooth with age. "This was my son's. Gray Wolf carried it always. It brings luck." "I can't take this." "You must. You are family now. Family carries each other, even when apart." Mika was crying silently. Thomas knelt in front of her. "Hey, no tears. You're going to make it through this. You're going to grow up strong and smart. You're going to remember your papa and your uncle who sacrificed for you. And you're going to live a life that makes all that sacrifice worthwhile. Can you do that?" Mika nodded, unable to speak. "Then go, all of you, and don't look back." They left him there in the narrow defile, Aita leading, Kaya supporting Mika, moving upward into the white. Thomas watched until they disappeared around a bend, watched until even their footprints began to fill with fresh snow. Then he turned his attention downward. Vaughn and his remaining man were closer now, maybe 30 minutes below. Thomas could see them clearly, dark shapes against white snow, moving with the determination of men who'd gone too far to turn back. He checked his rifle. 5 rounds left. Not many, but enough if he was careful. He positioned himself behind a boulder that offered good cover and clear sightlines down the defile. Anyone coming through would be exposed, vulnerable. He waited. The wind howled. Snow fell. Time stretched and compressed in the strange way it did when waiting for violence. Minutes felt like hours. Seconds passed in heartbeats. Then movement. Vaughn appeared at the bottom of the defile. He'd spotted Thomas's position immediately. The man hadn't survived this long by being careless. "Thomas!" Vaughn's voice barely carried over the wind. "This is pointless. You can't hold us forever." "Don't need forever," Thomas called back. "Just long enough." Long enough for what? For them to freeze on the summit? For the children to die of exposure? You're killing them, Thomas, just slower than I would. At least I'm giving them a chance. A chance at what? Dying tired instead of dying quick? Vaughn moved closer, using the rocks for cover. This is madness, and you know it, Thomas fired. The shot sparked off granite 3 feet from Vaughn's position. A warning. Next one won't miss, Thomas shouted. You only have so many bullets, old friend, and I have all day. Actually, Thomas thought, you don't. Darkness was coming fast. No one climbed this mountain at night and lived. Vaughn had to finish this in the next hour or abandon the pursuit. Time was the real enemy now. Thomas settled in to wait. His position was good, defensible. He could hold here for a while. Long enough, he hoped, for Aita and the girls to reach safety. His mind wandered as he watched for movement below. Thought about Sarah and Emma. About the life he'd had and lost. About the choices that led here. 7 years ago, he'd closed a door out of fear. Today, he was dying to hold one open. Maybe that was redemption. Maybe it was just mathematics. Either way, it felt right. Movement caught his eye. Not Vaughn, the other man, trying to flank around to the left. Thomas tracked him with the rifle, waiting for a clear shot. The man emerged from cover for just a second. Thomas fired. The bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. He fell, crying out in pain. "Damn you, Thomas!" Vaughn's voice, furious now. Thomas had 4 rounds left. Vaughn tried a different approach, started talking, trying to distract, to negotiate, to buy time or create opportunity. "You remember that buck we took down?" Vaughn called. 10-point bull elk, up near Flathead Lake? Thomas remembered. They'd been friends once. Good friends. Had hunted together, shared meals, helped each other build cabins and barns. "We were good together, Thomas. A team. We could be again. Just walk away from this. I'll tell Rutherford they got away. You disappear. Everyone wins." "Except the people you murder," Thomas replied. "They're already dead. Don't you see that? Rutherford owns half of Montana. He wants them gone. If not me, someone else will finish this. At least with me it'll be quick. That's supposed to make it right? It makes it inevitable." Thomas shifted position slightly. His legs were cramping from the cold and the crouch. He needed to move, but couldn't risk exposure. Below, Vaughn made his play. The wounded man, the one Thomas had shot, suddenly stumbled into the open. He was unarmed, hands raised, bleeding heavily. "Don't shoot," the man called. "I surrender. I need help." It was a trap. Had to be. But the man was genuinely hurt, genuinely bleeding. Thomas could see the dark stains spreading on his coat. His finger tightened on the trigger, then relaxed. He couldn't shoot an unarmed, wounded man. Couldn't become that, no matter what. "Come ahead," Thomas called. "Slow." The man stumbled forward, got within 20 feet. Then Vaughn appeared behind him, using him as a shield, rifle aimed over the wounded man's shoulder. "Drop it, Thomas." Thomas's rifle was still aimed at the wounded man, at Vaughn's shield. He couldn't get a clear shot without killing an injured man who'd already surrendered. They were at an impasse. Then the wounded man did something unexpected, something brave and stupid and final. He threw himself sideways. "Run!" he screamed at Thomas. Vaughn fired. The shot took his own man in the back. The body fell, twitching once, then still. But it had given Thomas his opening. He fired twice in rapid succession. Both shots at Vaughn's position. Saw granite explode. Saw Vaughn duck back behind cover. 2 rounds left. Thomas ran. Up the defile, climbing fast, using every bit of cover the terrain offered. Behind him, Vaughn's rage echoed off stone. The climb became a blur. Hands found holds without conscious thought. Feet found purchase through instinct. The mountain was a maze of rock and ice, and he navigated it with the desperation of a man who'd found something worth dying for and wasn't quite ready to yet. He emerged onto a broader slope just as darkness began to fall. Above, perhaps a half-mile distant, he could see movement. 3 shapes, dark against white snow. Aita and the girls. They'd made good progress. Behind him, Vaughn still came, relentless, obsessed. Thomas pushed upward. His lungs burned. His legs screamed. Frost formed on his beard with each exhaled breath. Still, he climbed. The summit appeared suddenly. Not a peak exactly, but a saddle between 2 high points. The pass itself. Wind screamed across it with enough force to knock a man down. Visibility dropped to almost nothing in the blowing snow. Thomas could barely see 10 feet ahead. He stumbled forward, calling out, "Aita! Kaya!" No answer, just wind. He moved carefully now. One wrong step could send him over an edge he couldn't see. The pass was narrow here, dropping away steeply on both sides into darkness and certain death. Then he saw them, huddled against a boulder on the far side of the summit, all 3 still alive. Relief flooded through him. They'd made it. They were across. He stumbled toward them, exhaustion finally catching up. Aita looked up, saw him, her face showing surprise and something like joy. "You came," she said. "Told you I would." "You lied well." "Practice," Thomas said. He collapsed beside them, breathing hard. "Vaughn?" Kaya asked. "Still coming. But the pass at night, in this wind, he'll have to wait for dawn." "So we have time." "We have time." Mika was shivering violently, despite being wrapped in every spare layer they had. Hypothermia was setting in. They needed shelter and warmth. Soon. "The mining shelter," Thomas said. "It's close. Maybe a mile down the Idaho side. We can make it." They helped each other up. 4 people now moving as one unit, supporting each other through the darkness and the wind. The descent was treacherous but short. Within an hour they saw it. A small wooden structure, half buried in snow, but intact. The door resisted at first, frozen shut. Thomas and Kaya together managed to force it open. Inside was musty darkness, but blessed relief from the wind. Thomas found the fireplace, still stocked with wood left by the last travelers through. The matches from the dead prospector sparked on the 3rd try. Flame caught, grew, spread warmth into the cold space. They collapsed around the fire. No one spoke for long minutes. They simply sat, absorbing heat, letting the reality of survival sink in. Finally, Aita laughed. It was a strange sound, rough and unexpected, but genuine. "We are alive," she said. "Against all reason, we are alive." Kaya smiled, then Mika. Then Thomas found himself smiling too. They'd crossed Ridge Pass in winter. They'd outrun death. They were in Idaho now, in Marshal Douglas's jurisdiction. Safe. Or so they thought. Outside, as the fire warmed them and exhaustion pulled them toward sleep, a figure stood in the darkness. Vaughn had made the summit, had followed their tracks to the shelter. Now he stood outside, rifle in hand, watching smoke rise from the chimney. He could burn them out, could shoot them as they emerged, could end this now. But the man with him, the wounded one, was dead. He was alone. 4 against 1, even with children and an old woman. Those weren't good odds. And he was tired. So tired. Vaughn made a decision. He'd wait for dawn, get the high ground, finish this properly. He moved back into the darkness, finding his own shelter in the rocks. Tomorrow. Tomorrow would be the end of it. Inside the shelter, Thomas jerked awake. Some instinct, some sixth sense. He moved to the window, peered out into the darkness. Nothing. Just snow and night. But he felt it. That certainty. Vaughn was close. This wasn't over yet. Morning came gray and cold. Thomas woke first, as he always did. The fire had burned down to coals during the night. He fed it carefully, nursing flame from ember, watching smoke curl toward the ceiling. Outside, dawn revealed a world scrubbed clean by wind. Fresh snow had fallen, covering tracks, erasing evidence of their passage. But it also erased evidence of pursuit. He moved to the window, scraped frost from the glass with his thumbnail. The landscape was deceptive in its beauty. White slopes falling away toward distant timber. Rock faces gleaming with ice. Sky the color of old steel. Nothing moved. Nothing suggested danger. Thomas didn't trust it for a second. Atida stirred, waking with the silence of someone who'd learned long ago that noise meant danger. She looked at Thomas, read his posture, understood immediately. "He is out there," she said, not a question. "Yes. You are certain?" "I feel it." Thomas turned from the window. "We need to move, now, before he gets positioned." They woke the girls gently. Kaya came alert fast, already reaching for her boots. Mika took longer, her eyes puffy with exhaustion and the residual pain of her twisted ankle. But she didn't complain, just began preparing herself with quiet determination. They ate a cold breakfast, the last of the hardtack divided 4 ways. Water from canteens they'd filled with melted snow the night before. Not much, but fuel for what lay ahead. "How far to Salmon?" Kaya asked. Thomas considered. "If we could walk straight, maybe 20 miles. But the terrain doesn't allow straight. Probably closer to 30, following the valleys down." "In good weather?" "In good weather, 2 days. In this?" He gestured at the window. 3, maybe 4. "And Vaughn?" "We'll try to end it today. He can't sustain a long chase. No supplies, no support. He's running on hate now, and hate burns hot, but fast." Aida adjusted her shawl, tucking it tight against the cold. "Hate can sustain a man longer than you think. I've seen it." They gathered their meager possessions. Thomas checked his rifle one last time. 2 rounds. That's all he had left. 2 chances. After that, it came down to knives and rocks and determination. He pulled Kaya aside as the others prepared. "If something happens to me, you lead. Follow the creek beds down. They'll take you to the Salmon River eventually. Follow that north to the town. Understand?" "I understand." Kaya's voice was steady. "But nothing's going to happen to you." "Maybe, but if it does, you don't stop. You don't come back. You get Mika and your grandmother to safety. That's the mission." "Thomas," she looked up at him with those eyes that had seen too much. "I won't leave you." "You will if I tell you to. That's how this works." She didn't answer, didn't promise, just turned away to help Mika with her bootlaces. Thomas sighed, stubborn, like her grandmother. They left the shelter as full light broke over the eastern peaks. The cold hit like a fist. -20 at least, maybe colder with wind chill. The kind of cold that made lungs ache with each breath, made exposed skin burn within seconds. They moved down slope, following what looked like an old game trail. The terrain was treacherous, hidden rocks beneath snow, ice patches disguised as solid ground. Twice Mika fell. Each time Kaya caught her, held her, helped her back up. An hour passed. They'd made perhaps 2 miles. Not fast enough. At this rate, Vaughn could catch them easily. That's when they found the body. Another one. Fresher than the prospector on the climb. This one may be weeks old. A man in his 30s, frozen in a sitting position against a tree. His eyes were open, staring at nothing. A rifle lay across his lap, unfired. Thomas recognized him, one of Rutherford's men, had seen him in town occasionally. The man must have been part of an earlier search party. Must have tried the pass and lost. "The mountain takes everyone equally," Aita observed. Thomas searched the body quickly, found 5 rifle cartridges, found a better knife than his own, found a small pouch of tobacco and, miraculously, a fire striker that looked functional. "The dead are generous today," he said, loading the cartridges into his rifle. 7 shots now. Better odds. They moved on. The trail descended into a narrow valley, creek frozen solid at the bottom. Trees appeared, stunted lodgepole pines twisted by constant wind. Not much cover, but better than the open slopes above. Thomas called a halt near a bend in the creek. Something felt wrong. The valley was too quiet. Even in winter there should be sound. Wind in trees, snow falling from overladen branches. Something. This silence was different. This was the silence of a predator, waiting. "Get down," Thomas whispered urgently. They dropped behind a fallen log. Thomas scanned the valley sides, looking for movement, for color, for anything that didn't belong. There, a flash of dark against white, maybe 300 yards upslope. Too far for accurate rifle fire, but close enough to matter. "He's above us," Thomas said quietly. "High ground, good position." "Can we go around?" Kaya asked. "Not without exposing ourselves. The valley narrows ahead. We'd be sitting targets in the choke point." "Then what?" Thomas thought fast. Vaughn had the advantage of position and patience. Could sit up there all day, wait for them to move. But Vaughn also had limits. No food, no shelter. The cold would work on him same as them, unless Vaughn had found his own dead man to loot. "We need to change the game," Thomas said. "Draw him down where we have a chance." "How?" Aita asked. Thomas looked at the frozen creek, at the trees lining its banks, at the snow-heavy branches overhead. An idea formed. Risky. Maybe stupid, but possible. "Kaya, can you make it to those trees there?" He pointed to a copse about 50 yards distant. She studied the route. Open ground for the first 20 yards, then scattered cover. "Yes. When you get there, start breaking branches, dead ones, dry ones. Make noise. Make it sound like you're trying to build a fire." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "You want to draw him to investigate." "Exactly. He'll think we're desperate, making mistakes. He'll come down to finish it." "And when he does?" "I'll be waiting." It was a simple plan. Simple plans had fewer ways to fail, but they also had fewer backup options. Aita gripped Thomas's arm. "You cannot face him alone." "I won't be alone. You'll be here, protecting the girls. That's the most important job." She wanted to argue. He could see it, but she also understood necessity. Sometimes the old had to let the young fight, even when every instinct screamed against it. "Go when ready," Thomas told Kaya. The girl took 3 deep breaths, preparing herself. Then she was up and running, moving fast and low across the snow. No shots rang out. Vaughn either hadn't seen her or was holding fire, waiting for a better opportunity. Kaya made the trees, started breaking branches exactly as Thomas had instructed. The sound carried in the cold air. Snap, crack, snap. Thomas moved into position, circling wide to get an angle on where Vaughn would likely approach. Found a good spot behind a boulder with clear sight lines. Settled in to wait. Minutes passed. The branch breaking continued, then stopped. Started again. Kaya was playing her part perfectly, making it seem natural, not staged. Movement caught Thomas's eye. There, Vaughn, moving down from his elevated position. Moving carefully, but with purpose. Taking the bait. Thomas tracked him through the rifle sights. 200 yards. 175. 150. He could take the shot, probably make it at this range, but probably wasn't certain. And he only had 7 rounds. Couldn't afford to miss. So he waited, let Vaughn come closer. 100 yards. 75. Vaughn was moving through the open now, exposed. This was the moment. Thomas exhaled slowly, squeezed the trigger. The shot cracked across the valley. Vaughn dove sideways, fast reflexes saving his life. The bullet kicked up snow where he'd been standing a second before. Return fire came immediately. 3 shots in quick succession. Professional. Controlled. Bullets sparked off Thomas's boulder, forcing him down. When Thomas looked up, Vaughn had disappeared. Found cover somewhere in the scattered rocks and trees. "Thomas!" Kaya's voice, frightened. "Stay down. Stay where you are." The valley fell quiet again. 2 predators, circling, trying to get advantage. Thomas changed position, moving quickly to a new spot before Vaughn could get a fix on his location. The mountain taught you to keep moving. Stillness meant death. "You're only making this harder, Thomas." Vaughn's voice echoed strangely, bouncing off rock walls. Hard to pinpoint his exact location. "Those children are going to freeze while we play games." Thomas said nothing. Silence gave away nothing. "I talked to Rutherford this morning," Vaughn continued. "Telegraph from Missoula. He's offering $2,000 now. $2,000, Thomas. More than you'll see in 10 years. Just walk away." Still Thomas remained silent. Let Vaughn talk. Talking meant breathing hard, meant giving away position through sound. "Damn you!" Frustration creeping into Vaughn's voice now. "Why do you care so much? They're nothing to you, just some Indians who knocked on your door." That brought Thomas's head up, because he realized, hearing it said so plainly, that Vaughn genuinely didn't understand, couldn't comprehend why someone would risk everything for strangers. And that was the difference between them. The thing that had changed, or maybe had always been different, just hidden beneath the surface of friendship. "They're family," Thomas called back. "That's all that matters." "Family?" Vaughn's laugh was bitter. "You met them 2 days ago." "And I chose them. Same way Sarah chose me. Same way Emma chose to trust the world every morning she woke up. Choice makes family, Marcus, not blood." A long pause. Then Vaughn's voice came back, quieter, dangerous. "Sarah and Emma died because you chose wrong. You remember that." The words hit like physical blows, because they were true, partially. Thomas had chosen wrong 7 years ago, had let fear guide him, and people he loved had paid the price. But that's why he was here now, why he was making this stand. Because second chances were rare. Because redemption wasn't about erasing the past. It was about choosing better when the same test came around again. Movement to his left. Vaughn trying to flank. Thomas swung the rifle, fired, missed, but close enough to force Vaughn back to cover. 6 rounds left. This couldn't continue. The cold was intensifying. Afternoon was fading toward evening. In another hour, the temperature would drop 20 more degrees. No one survived that without shelter and fire. Thomas made a decision. Risky. But this whole thing had been risky from the start. He stood up, exposed himself fully, rifle held loose in one hand. "Marcus," he called, "let's end this. You and me. Let them go, and we settle it here." Silence. Then Vaughn stepped out from his cover as well. 50 yards separated them now, close enough to hit with iron sights, close enough to see each other's faces clearly. They stood in the snow, 2 men who'd once been friends, now divided by a chasm wider than any mountain pass. "You think I'll honor that?" Vaughn asked. "Think I'll let them walk away?" "I think you're tired," Thomas said. "I think you're cold and hungry and starting to wonder if Rutherford's money is worth dying for. I think part of you remembers what it was like to be decent. Decent doesn't pay." But Vaughn's voice lacked conviction. "No, but decent lets you sleep at night. When's the last time you slept well, Marcus?" Vaughn's face twisted. "Don't pretend you know me. I do know you. I knew you when you helped me build my cabin, when you sat with me at Sarah's grave, when you had a soul underneath the greed." "That man died." Vaughn's rifle came up slightly. "Same time your family did." "Then I'm sorry for both losses." They stared at each other across the snow. The moment stretched, fragile as ice. Then Vaughn smiled. It wasn't pleasant. "You always were too trusting, Thomas." He raised his rifle. Thomas was faster. He fired first. The bullet took Vaughn high in the shoulder, spinning him around. Vaughn's shot went wild, disappearing into the sky. Vaughn fell to one knee, cursing. His rifle had dropped in the snow. He reached for it with his good hand. Thomas walked forward, his own rifle trained steady. "Don't!" Vaughn's hand stopped. He looked up at Thomas, blood staining his coat, pain and hate warring in his eyes. "Finish it then," he spat. Thomas stood over him, could pull the trigger, should pull the trigger. Vaughn had tried to kill children, had murdered his own man, had chosen money over everything decent. But Thomas had already killed enough, had enough blood on his hands. "No," he said. He kicked Vaughn's rifle away, out of reach. Then he backed away, keeping his own weapon trained. "Kaya! Aita! Time to move!" They emerged from hiding, moved quickly past Vaughn, giving him wide berth. Mika glanced back once, her face unreadable. "You're leaving me here?" Vaughn asked, disbelief replacing hate. "I'll freeze." "Maybe," Thomas said. "Or maybe you'll make it down to timber, build a fire, live to make different choices." "You're a fool." "Probably, but I'm a fool who can live with himself." Thomas gestured to the girls. "Let's go." They left Vaughn there in the snow, wounded but alive. It wasn't mercy exactly. It wasn't justice. It was something in between. Something that felt right, even if it wasn't smart. They walked for another hour as light began to fail. The valley opened up, more trees now, better protection from wind. The slope gradually decreased. They were coming down from the high country. But Joseph was weakening. The gunshot wound from Vaughn had taken more out of him than he'd admitted. He stumbled, caught himself, stumbled again. "We need to rest," Aida said. "No time," Joseph replied, his voice tight with pain. "Vaughn is still behind us. You must reach Red Skywalker's land. It's close now. Another mile, maybe 2. "You're bleeding again," Kaya observed, pointing to the dark stain spreading on Joseph's coat. Joseph looked down at himself, almost surprised. "So I am." He smiled weakly. "I've had worse." But they all knew it was a lie. They found a sheltered spot, built a small fire. Joseph sat heavily, his breathing labored. Thomas tried to rebandage the wound, but there was too much damage. The bullet had torn something vital. "Joseph," Thomas said quietly, "you need a doctor." "No doctor can help me now." Joseph's eyes were clear despite his pain. "But I got you through the pass. I saved you where I couldn't save Standing Elk. That's enough." Tears streamed down Mika's face. Even Kaya's stoic mask cracked. "When you reach Red Skywalker's village," Joseph said, his voice fading, "tell him Joseph Blackfeather kept his promise. Tell him the path through the pass is still open for those brave enough to take it." "We will," Aida said, gripping his hand. Joseph smiled. "My brother is waiting for me. I can see him now." His eyes focused on something beyond them, beyond the fire, beyond the mountain. "Standing Elk. I'm coming." His hand went slack in Aida's grip. For a long moment, no one spoke. The fire crackled. The wind whispered through the pines. "We bury him?" Kaya asked. "The ground is frozen," Thomas said. "But we mark the place. Come spring, Red Skywalker's people can return for him." They gathered stones, built a cairn. Aida sang a low song in Apache, honoring the dead. Thomas added his own silent prayer for a man he'd known less than 2 days, but who had given everything. As they prepared to leave, Mika placed a small pine branch on the cairn. "Thank you, Mr. Joseph," she whispered. They walked the final miles in silence, grieving. That's when they saw them. 3 men, standing beside a fire at the edge of a clearing. Native men, Nez Perce by their dress. They'd been waiting. "You have come far," the eldest said when they drew close. His English was accented but clear. He was perhaps 70, standing straight despite his age. "We have," Aida replied, her voice heavy with exhaustion and grief. "I am Red Skywalker. Joseph Blackfeather sent word you were coming. He said you would need sanctuary." Thomas felt his throat tighten. "Joseph is dead. He died an hour ago, guiding us through the pass." Red Skywalker closed his eyes briefly. "He was my cousin, a good man who carried great sadness. But he found purpose at the end. That is a gift." He opened his eyes. "Come, you are welcome here. You are safe now." 70 years old, at least, but standing straight and strong. He watched them approach without fear. "You have come far," he said when they drew close. His English was accented but clear. "We have," Aida replied. "I am Red Skywalker. This is the edge of my people's land. You are welcome here." Thomas felt tension he hadn't known he was carrying release from his shoulders. "We need help. There's a wounded man back in the valley. He's dangerous, but I couldn't kill him." Red Skywalker nodded. "I will send men to find him. Tend his wounds. Deliver him to the marshal in Salmon." He gestured to the fire. "But first, you warm yourselves. Eat. You are safe now." Safe. The word felt foreign. Thomas couldn't quite believe it. But as they settled around the fire, as food was shared and warmth seeped back into frozen limbs, he began to accept it. They'd crossed Ridge Pass. They'd survived Vaughn. They'd made it to Idaho. Kaya sat beside him, Mika's head in her lap, as the younger girl finally let exhaustion claim her. "We made it," Kaya said softly. "We did. Because of you. Because of all of us." Thomas looked at the three faces illuminated by firelight. Aita's weathered features, Kaya's two old eyes, Mika's peaceful sleep. "We saved each other." Red Skywalker spoke again. "There is a community not far from here, my people. Some Apache too, who came last year. The girls could grow up there, learn, be safe." Aita met Thomas's eyes. A question passed between them without words. "What about you, Thomas Reed?" Red Skywalker asked. "Will you stay? Help build something good?" Thomas thought about his empty cabin back in Montana, about 7 years of solitude and grief, about doors closed and doors opened. "Yeah," he said, "I think I will." Above them, through gaps in the clouds, stars began to appear. The same stars that had watched them struggle across the pass. The same stars that would watch them build new lives in this new place. Winter still had them, but spring would come eventually. It always did, and they would be ready. 2 days passed in Red Skywalker's camp like a dream after a nightmare. The community sat nestled in a valley where 3 creeks converged, protected on all sides by timber and rock. 20 families lived here, mostly Nez Perce, with a handful of Apache who'd found their way north over the years. Simple homes, some traditional, some built in the white style with lumber. Smoke rose from chimneys. Children played in the snow. It was everything the reservation had promised and never delivered. Safety, dignity, home. Mika's ankle healed quickly with rest and proper care. The community's healer, a woman named Standing Bear, wrapped it with poultices that smelled of pine and something else Thomas couldn't identify. Within a day, Mika was walking without limping. Within 2, she was running with the other children, her laughter carrying across the snow. Thomas watched her play and felt something in his chest unclench. She was 9 years old, and she was laughing. That simple fact felt like victory. Kaya had found herself drawn to the young women of the community. They taught her things Thomas never could. How to tan hides properly, how to weave baskets that held water, how to identify plants that would matter come spring. She absorbed it all with hungry intensity, reclaiming knowledge her short, brutal life had denied her. Aita spent her days with the elders. They spoke in Apache and Nez Perce, languages that flowed like rivers, carrying stories and wisdom across the barrier of years. Thomas would see her sometimes, sitting in a circle of old faces, her expression peaceful in a way he'd never witnessed before. As for Thomas himself, he helped where he could, chopped wood, repaired a fence damaged by wind, showed a young man how to clean and maintain a rifle that had been neglected. Small things, but useful things. On the 3rd morning, Red Skywalker approached him as he split kindling. "The marshal is coming," the old man said. "He received the message from the young one, Samuel." Thomas set down his axe. "When?" "Today, before sunset." Red Skywalker studied Thomas's face. "There will be questions, testimony required. You understand this?" "I do." "And the man you left in the pass, Vaughn, my people found him, brought him down yesterday. He lives, though his shoulder will never be the same." Thomas absorbed this. Part of him wished Vaughn hadn't survived. Would have been simpler, cleaner. But simple and clean rarely described life. "Where is he now?" "In the meeting house, guarded, angry but contained. Red Skywalker paused. He has been asking for you. I've got nothing to say to him. Perhaps, but he may have things to say to you. Sometimes the defeated need to speak their piece. Gives them closure. Thomas didn't want to give Vaughn anything, but something in Red Skywalker's expression suggested this was important, that facing Vaughn again was part of finishing this properly. All right, Thomas said. I'll see him. The meeting house was the largest structure in the community, used for gatherings, celebrations, important decisions. Now it served as a temporary jail. Vaughn sat in the corner, his shoulder bandaged, his hands bound in front of him. Two young Nez Perce men stood guard at the door. Vaughn looked up as Thomas entered. His face was haggard, aged 10 years in 3 days. The mountain and failure had broken something in him. "Come to gloat?" Vaughn asked. His voice was rough, dried out. "No." Thomas pulled up a chair, sat facing his former friend. "Red Skywalker said you wanted to talk." "Did I?" Vaughn laughed bitterly. "Can't remember what I want anymore." He shifted, wincing at the movement. "You should have killed me. Would have been kinder." "Probably. So why didn't you?" Thomas considered the question. "Because I've had enough of death. Because killing you wouldn't have brought Sarah and Emma back. Because maybe you'll have a chance to be different." "Different." Vaughn tested the word. "I'm going to prison, Thomas. Conspiracy to murder. Maybe actual murder, depending on what they find. Different means dying in a cell instead of on a mountain. Maybe. Or maybe you cooperate. Testify against Rutherford. Help expose the whole corrupt system. That's different too." Vaughn was quiet for a long moment. "You really believe that? That I can still do something decent?" "I believe everyone gets to choose, right up until they don't." "Philosophical today, aren't you?" But there was no heat in it. Vaughn looked down at his bound hands. "I keep thinking about that night, 7 years ago, the Apache family at your barn." Thomas waited. "I didn't tell you they had disease because I believed it," Vaughn continued. "I said it because Rutherford wanted them gone. Even back then, he was buying up land, wanted no complications, asked me to make sure no one helped them, paid me $50. He looked up, meeting Thomas's eyes. "I killed your family for $50. Didn't even know I was doing it at the time. But looking back, I see it clear." The revelation hit Thomas like a physical blow. All these years he'd blamed himself, and he should. He'd made the choice. But Vaughn had set the stage, had planted the fear deliberately, for money. "Why tell me this now?" Thomas asked. His voice was steady, despite the rage building inside. "Because you deserve to know. Because I'm tired of carrying it alone." Vaughn's face twisted. "And because maybe if I say it out loud, confess it to the man I wronged most, maybe I can start to be that different person you think is still in here somewhere." Thomas stood, walked to the window, looked out at the community going about its day, saw Mika playing in the snow, saw Kaya helping Standing Bear carry water, saw Aita sitting with the elders, peaceful and safe. He'd spent 7 years hating himself, 7 years thinking he was the monster who killed his family through cowardice. And he was. But he'd had help, had been manipulated by a man he'd trusted. The rage wanted to consume him, wanted him to turn around and beat Vaughn until there was nothing left. But that wouldn't change anything, wouldn't bring Sarah and Emma back, would just add more darkness to a world that had plenty already. "I forgive you," Thomas said. The words surprised him as much as they clearly surprised Vaughn. "What?" "I forgive you. Not because you deserve it. Because I need to." Thomas turned from the window. "I've been carrying guilt and grief for 7 years. Adding your betrayal to that load won't help. So I'm letting it go. All of it." Vaughn stared at him. "You're serious?" "I am." Thomas moved toward the door. "But I won't forget. And when you testify against Rutherford, you tell them everything. Every bribe, every manipulation, every family he destroyed. You burn his empire down with your words. That's how you earn the forgiveness I'm giving you now." "And if I don't?" Thomas paused at the threshold. "Then you die exactly as worthless as you think you are." He looked back one last time. "Choose better, Marcus." He left Vaughn sitting there, bound and broken, with the weight of choice settling onto shoulders that had avoided it for too long. Outside, the day had turned bright, one of those crystal-clear winter days where everything seemed possible. Thomas found Aita and the girls near the central fire pit where the community gathered for meals. "The marshal comes today," he told them. "We'll need to give testimony. Tell what happened." Kaya nodded. She'd been expecting this. "Will they believe us?" "Samuel will back us up. And Vaughn, I think, will tell the truth now. He's done running." "And Rutherford?" Aita asked. "That's up to the law." As if summoned by the conversation, riders appeared on the southern trail. 5 of them. The lead rider was a man in his mid-50s, wearing a marshal's badge that caught the sunlight. Peter Douglas, Thomas assumed. Behind him rode Samuel Cooper, looking nervous but determined. The other 3 were deputies, young and alert. The community gathered as the riders entered. Red Skywalker stepped forward as host and elder. "Marshal Douglas," he said, "welcome. You come seeking truth?" "I do." Douglas dismounted. He had the weathered face of a man who'd spent decades enforcing law in places where law was more suggestion than rule. His eyes were sharp, taking in everything. "I received word of serious crimes: murder, conspiracy, persecution of innocents." "All true," Red Skywalker said. "But the victims and witnesses can speak better than I. Thomas Reed, step forward." Thomas moved into the center of the gathering, felt dozens of eyes on him, felt the weight of what came next. "Marshal," he said, "my name is Thomas Reed. 4 days ago, I gave shelter to 3 people fleeing persecution. What followed was a chase across Ridge Pass, multiple attempts on our lives, and the revelation of a conspiracy reaching to Silas Rutherford himself." Douglas listened as Thomas laid out the events, listened as Aita added details about their original flight from the reservation, listened as Kaya, her voice steady despite her youth, described watching her father die and spending months running from Rutherford's hired men. Samuel spoke next, confessing his role, explaining Vaughn's orders, describing the moment he chose to switch sides. When they'd finished, Douglas was quiet for a long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "I'll need to take statements, official ones, written and signed, and I'll need to interview Vaughn." He looked at Red Skywalker. "You're holding him here?" "We are, as a courtesy to you and to justice." "I appreciate that." Douglas turned back to Thomas. "What you did, helping these people, that took courage. But it also put you outside the law, technically. You harbored fugitives." "They weren't fugitives," Thomas said flatly. "They were people who took spoiled food the warehouse was throwing away. That's not theft. That's survival." "I agree." "But we'll need to make it official." Clear their names properly. Douglas smiled slightly. Fortunately, I have the authority to do that. As of this moment, all charges against Aita, Kaya, and Mika are dismissed. They're free and clear. Relief flooded through Thomas. He saw Aita's shoulders slump slightly, as tension she'd carried for months finally released. Saw Mika bury her face in Kaya's coat, crying softly. Saw Kaya's face remain stoic, but her eyes told the story. "Thank you, Marshal," Aita said quietly. "Don't thank me. Thank Mr. Reed and young Samuel here. They're the ones who stood up." Douglas gestured to his deputies. "Now, let's go talk to Vaughn, and then we'll need to deal with Rutherford." They spent the rest of the afternoon in the meeting house. Douglas questioned Vaughn for over 2 hours. Thomas wasn't present for most of it, but he could hear Vaughn's voice through the walls, confessing, explaining, betraying his former employer with the thoroughness of a man who had nothing left to lose. When Douglas emerged, his face was grim. "Rutherford's going down," he said. "Vaughn gave us everything. Names, dates, payments. Other families who were driven off or killed. It's worse than I thought. Much worse." "Will you arrest him?" Red Skywalker asked. "I've already sent a telegram to the territorial governor. Federal marshals are being dispatched. Rutherford won't see Spring as a free man." That evening, the community held a gathering. Not quite a celebration, the weight of recent events too heavy for that, but an acknowledgement, a recognition that justice, rare as it was, had been served. Thomas sat with Aita and the girls around the central fire. Other families joined them, sharing food and warmth. Children ran between the adults, playing games Thomas didn't know the rules to. Laughter mixed with conversation in multiple languages. "What will you do now?" Aita asked Thomas. "Return to Montana?" Thomas thought about his cabin, about 7 years of isolation and grief, about a life that seemed very far away now. "No," he said, "nothing for me there. Thought maybe I'd stay here if Red Skywalker allows it. Help build, be useful." Aita smiled. "You would be welcome, as family." "Family," Thomas repeated. The word still felt strange, new, but good. Kaya leaned against his shoulder, a gesture of trust and affection that surprised him. "You could teach me to shoot, really shoot." "I could," Thomas agreed, "but not because you need to run anymore. Because it's a useful skill. Because it's good to be capable." "I'd like that." Mika had fallen asleep, her head in Aita's lap. The old woman stroked her granddaughter's hair with gentle hands. "She is dreaming good dreams tonight," Aita observed. "First time in so long." Marshal Douglas approached, a cup of something hot in his hands. "Mind if I join you?" "Please." Thomas gestured to the space beside him. Douglas sat with a groan. "Getting too old for mountain riding in winter." He sipped his drink, then looked at Thomas. "You did good work, Reed. Saved lives. Stood up when most men would have looked away." "I looked away once before," Thomas said. "Didn't care for how that felt." "Well, you look straight ahead this time." Douglas was quiet for a moment. "I could use a deputy. Someone who knows the mountain country. Someone with a moral backbone. Job pays $60 a month plus expenses." Thomas blinked in surprise. "You're offering me a job?" "I am. Think about it. No pressure. But good men are hard to find. Men who'll do what's right even when it costs them. Those are even rarer." "I'll think on it," Thomas said. As night deepened and the fire burned low, families began drifting to their homes. Thomas helped Aita carry the sleeping Mika to the small cabin Red Sky Walker had provided. Kaya walked beside them, quiet but content. "Thank you," Aita said as they reached the door. "For everything." "You already thanked me. I will thank you every day for the rest of my life. You gave us a future. That is not a small thing." Thomas didn't know what to say to that, so he simply nodded and helped settle Mika into bed. Kaya climbed in beside her sister, and within moments both girls were breathing the deep, steady rhythm of exhausted sleep. Outside, Thomas and Aita stood looking at the stars, the same stars that had watched them struggle across the pass. But from here, from this safe valley, they seemed different, friendlier somehow. "Do you think we will see Vaughn again?" Aita asked. "Probably. At trial. He'll testify, serve his time. Maybe get out in 10 years if he's lucky. And you have forgiven him." "I'm trying to." "That is wisdom." Aita looked at him. "My son, Grey Wolf, he would have liked you very much, would have called you brother. I wish I could have known him." "In a way, you do. You see him in Kaya's strength, in Mika's resilience, in the love they carry for each other. Children are how we live beyond death," Thomas Reed. "They are our message to the future." Thomas thought about Sarah and Emma, about the children he'd lost and the children he'd saved, about legacy and redemption, and all the complicated ways life weaved itself together. "You should rest," he said finally. "It's been a long few days." "Yes, long, but good." Aita touched his arm gently. "Sleep well, Thomas. Tomorrow we begin again." She went inside, leaving Thomas alone with the night and his thoughts. He walked through the quiet community, past homes with lamplight glowing in windows, heard a baby crying softly, quickly soothed, heard voices in conversation, warm and unhurried, heard life being lived without fear. This was what they'd crossed the mountain for. This peace, this normalcy, this future. And somehow, miraculously, they'd made it. Thomas looked back toward the north, toward Ridge Pass, invisible in darkness. Somewhere up there, Joseph Blackfeather remained, frozen in the pass, his sacrifice buying them the time they'd needed. "We made it, Joseph," Thomas said quietly to the night. "Your brother can rest easy. So can you." The wind carried his words away into darkness. And tomorrow, Thomas Reed would wake in a place he'd never expected to call home, surrounded by a family he'd never expected to have, ready to build a life he'd never imagined possible. Winter still held the land, but spring was coming. It always did. 3 months passed like water flowing downhill, inevitable, natural, transforming everything it touched. Spring came to the Salmon River Valley the way it always did in Idaho. Slowly at first, reluctant, as if winter needed convincing to release its grip. Then, suddenly, almost violently, as snow melted and creeks swelled, and the world remembered it had colors other than white and gray. Thomas Reed stood outside the cabin he'd built, watching dawn paint the eastern peaks in shades of gold and rose. The structure wasn't large, just one room with a loft, but it was solid. Good logs, chinked properly, roof that wouldn't leak come summer storms. He'd built it with his own hands over the course of 6 weeks, with help from the community when heavy lifting was required. It sat 50 yards from Aita's home, close enough to matter, but far enough to respect boundaries. His cabin, his space, but not isolated, never isolated again. The door of Aita's home opened, and Kaya emerged, stretching in the early light. She was 13 now, had passed that birthday quietly 2 weeks ago. taller than when they'd crossed the pass, stronger. But it was the change in her eyes that struck Thomas most. They were still old in some ways, still carried memories no child should have. But something new had appeared there too. Hope, possibility, future. She saw Thomas and waved.
He waved back. This was routine now. Morning greetings, shared meals, days spent working alongside each other, building something that looked remarkably like a life. "Coffee's ready if you want some," Kaya called. "Be right there." Thomas pulled on his coat, not because he needed it anymore, but from habit, and walked to Aita's home. Inside, warmth and the smell of fry bread greeted him. Mika sat at the table, her hair being braided by Aita, chattering about something that had happened yesterday with the other children. She stopped mid-sentence when Thomas entered, smiled that bright, unguarded smile children wore when they felt safe, then continued her story without missing a beat. Thomas poured coffee from the pot, settled into the chair that had somehow become his chair, and listened. This too was routine. This too was family. After breakfast, Thomas walked to the community center where Marshal Douglas had set up a temporary office. The trial was scheduled to begin in Lewiston in 2 weeks. Vaughn had been moved there a month ago, along with Silas Rutherford, who'd been arrested in spectacular fashion. Federal marshals had raided his ranch at dawn, found ledgers documenting years of bribery, extortion, and murder for hire. The case was solid, overwhelming actually, but it still required testimony, required people willing to stand up publicly and speak truth to power. Douglas looked up as Thomas entered. The marshal had aged in the past 3 months, or maybe Thomas just noticed it now. The job wore on a man. "Morning, Reed," Douglas gestured to a chair. "You ready for Lewiston?" "As I'll ever be." "Aita and the girls?" "Aita's ready. Been ready since this started. Kaya too, though she's nervous. Mika, I don't know. She's young to go through cross-examination." Douglas nodded. "Prosecution says they might not need her testimony." Between you, Aita, Kaya, Samuel, and Vaughn's confession, they've got enough to bury Rutherford 6 times over. But it helps to have her available if needed. "She'll be there," Thomas said. "We all will." Douglas studied him for a moment. "You thought any more about my offer? Deputy position?" Thomas had thought about little else. The job appealed to him, would give him purpose beyond building cabins and chopping wood, would let him help people the way he'd been helped. But it also meant traveling, meant leaving the community for days or weeks at a time, meant leaving the girls. "I'd need to talk to Aita," Thomas said. "Make sure she's comfortable with me being gone sometimes." "Fair enough." Douglas shuffled some papers. "For what it's worth, I think you'd be good at it. You've got the temperament, patient when you need to be, decisive when action's required. That's rare." Thomas sipped his coffee, thinking. Finally, he nodded. "All right. After the trial, I'll take the job, on one condition." "What's that?" "I get to come back here regular. This is home now. I won't abandon that." "Deal." Douglas extended his hand. They shook on it. "Welcome to law enforcement, Deputy Reed." The title felt strange. Deputy. Thomas Reed, who'd spent 7 years hiding from the world, was now part of the system meant to protect it. Life was funny that way. He left the office and walked through the community. Spring work was in full swing. Gardens being prepared for planting, fences repaired, homes getting fresh chinking. Everyone had a task. Everyone contributed. Thomas found Red Skywalker near the creek, supervising the repair of a fishing weir damaged by spring melt. "You have the look of a man with news," the old man observed. "Taking the marshal's offer. Deputy work." Red Skywalker nodded approval. "Good. You will be good at this. He paused. But you are worried about the girls. I'll be gone sometimes. They've had too many people leave already. Well, they are not children anymore. Well, Mika still is. But Kaya grows into a woman. They understand duty. Understand that sometimes we must leave to make the world safer for our return. Red Skywalker laid a hand on Thomas's shoulder. And Aita will be here. I will be here. The community will be here. They will never be alone again. Thomas felt something in his chest ease. Thank you. No thanks needed. You are family. This is what family does. That word again. Family. Thomas was beginning to understand its weight, its comfort, its obligation. He spent the rest of the morning working on a storage shed for the community. Physical labor that let his mind wander. He thought about the trial, about seeing Vaughn again, about facing Rutherford in a courtroom and speaking truth about all the man had done. It would be hard, would require reliving trauma and fear. But it was necessary. Justice wasn't just about punishment. It was about acknowledgement, about saying publicly that what happened mattered, that the victims mattered. Lunch was a community affair, as always. Long tables set up outdoors, now that weather allowed. 40 people gathering, sharing food and conversation. Thomas sat with Aita and the girls, but also with Standing Bear, the healer, and John Whitehorse, who'd taught him the proper way to build the fishing weir, and half a dozen others whose names he was still learning. I heard you're becoming a deputy, Standing Bear said. Good choice. You have the face for it. The face? Stern, but kind. People will trust you. Thomas wasn't sure about that, but he appreciated the sentiment. After lunch, he found himself alone with Aita, while the girls played with other children near the creek. The old woman worked on a beading project, her fingers nimble despite her age. You will leave sometimes, she said. Not a question. Yes, marshal work, but I'll always come back. I know. She didn't look up from her work. Kaya knows too. She asked me this morning if you would abandon us now that we are safe. I told her no. Told her you are not that kind of man. And Mika? Mika does not think in those terms yet. She simply trusts that tomorrow will be good, because today was good. It is a gift of the young. Aita set down her beading. But Thomas, you should know, whatever you do, wherever you go, you will always be family. That bond was forged in the past. It cannot be broken by distance or time. Thank you, Thomas said quietly. Do not thank me. I am stating fact, not granting favor. She smiled. Besides, you will return for Kaya's lessons. She reminds me daily that you promised to teach her to shoot properly. I did promise that. Then you will keep it. You are a man who keeps promises. 2 weeks later, they traveled to Lewiston. Thomas, Aita, Kaya, and Mika, along with Marshall Douglas and Samuel Cooper. A day's ride in good weather, covering ground that would have taken a week in winter. The town was larger than Thomas expected. Real streets, brick buildings, people everywhere. After 3 months in the quiet community, it felt overwhelming. He saw Mika press closer to Kaya, intimidated by the crowds. Stay close, Thomas murmured. We'll be fine. The courthouse was an imposing structure, 3 stories of gray stone meant to project authority and permanence. Inside, the hallways echoed with footsteps and hushed conversations. Lawyers in fine suits, court officials with leather-bound documents, the machinery of justice grinding slowly forward. They were shown to a witness room to wait. Others were already there. Samuel,
looking nervous in clothes that didn't quite fit. Two other families, Apache and Nez Perce, who'd been driven from their lands by Rutherford's men. An older white man who'd refused to sell his property and been burned out for his stubbornness. All victims.
All survivors. All here to speak truth. The door opened, and Vaughn was brought in, shackled and escorted by two deputies. He'd lost weight, looked older than his 51 years, but his eyes were clearer than Thomas had seen them in the past. Sober, focused. Vaughn's gaze found Thomas, held for a moment, then moved to Aita and the girls. Something like shame crossed his face before he looked away. "All witnesses will be called in order," a court official announced. "Please remain here until summoned. There's water and facilities down the hall if needed." Then they waited. Time moved strangely in that room. Hours felt like days. The morning testimony began with surveyor maps and property deeds, establishing what land Rutherford had acquired and how. Dry material, but necessary, building the foundation for what came next. Thomas was called after lunch. The courtroom was packed, spectators filling every bench, journalists with notebooks. Rutherford sat at the defense table, flanked by three expensive lawyers. He looked calm, confident, a man who believed money could solve any problem. Thomas took the oath, sat in the witness chair, and began. He told the story simply. How Aita and the girls had knocked on his door, how he'd given shelter, how Vaughn and Rutherford's men had pursued them, how they'd crossed Ridge Pass in winter, chased by men with orders to kill. The prosecution led him through it methodically, establishing timeline, establishing intent, establishing that Rutherford had ordered the deaths of children. Then came cross-examination. Rutherford's lead attorney was smooth, well-dressed, spoke with the easy confidence of someone used to winning. "Mr. Reed, you admit you harbored fugitives from the reservation?" "I gave shelter to people who needed it." "People who'd stolen property?" "People who took spoiled food from a warehouse, food that was being thrown away." "But technically stolen." If taking garbage is theft, then yes. A ripple of laughter from the gallery. The judge gavelled for order. The attorney shifted tactics. "You and Sheriff Vaughn were friends once?" "We were." "And he'd helped you in the past?" "Yes." "Isn't it possible you misunderstood his intentions? That he was trying to uphold the law, not commit murder?" Thomas leaned forward slightly. "I watched him shoot his own man in the back. I heard him say children needed to be killed before they grew up. There was no misunderstanding." "So you claim. But conveniently, this man he allegedly shot is dead. Can't contradict your story." "Samuel Cooper can. He was there." The attorney frowned. His script was getting away from him. "No further questions." Aita testified next. She spoke with quiet dignity about her son's death, about months of running, about watching her granddaughters lose their childhood to fear. Her testimony was powerful precisely because it was understated. Facts delivered without embellishment. Truth needing no decoration. Kaya followed. At 13, she was the youngest witness. The prosecutor was gentle with her, but the defense attorney tried to break her. "Young lady, isn't it possible you misremember events? That fear made things seem worse than they were?" Kaya looked at him steadily. "I remember my father bleeding in the dirt. I remember running until my feet bled. I remember men with guns chasing us through snow. I remember everything." Her voice didn't waver. "I wish I could forget."
But I remember." The courtroom was silent when she finished. Even Rutherford's attorney seemed shaken. Vaughn testified last. He'd made a deal with the prosecution. Full cooperation in exchange for a reduced sentence. 20 years instead of hanging. He told everything. Every bribe, every murder, every family destroyed. Named names, provided dates, corroborated every detail of every other witness.
When asked why he'd done it, Vaughn's answer was simple. Money, and the belief that it didn't matter, that some people's lives were worth less than others. He looked directly at Rutherford. "I was wrong, and I'm sorry doesn't begin to cover it." The trial lasted 3 days. The jury deliberated for 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Rutherford was sentenced to life in the territorial prison. His assets were seized. His land distributed to the families he'd displaced. Justice, imperfect and incomplete, but justice nonetheless. Outside the courthouse, Thomas stood with Aita and the girls in the afternoon sun. Around them, other witnesses gathered, talking quietly, relief evident on every face. Marshal Douglas approached. "Well, that's done." "Yeah," Thomas agreed. "It's done. You ready to start deputy work next week?" Thomas looked at Kaya and Mika, at Aita's weathered face, at these people who'd become his family through fire and ice and choice. "Yeah," he said. "I'm ready." They returned to the community the next day, rode into the valley as evening fell, seeing lamplight already glowing in windows, seeing home. That night there was a gathering, not a celebration exactly. Too much had been lost to celebrate, but a recognition, an acknowledgement that justice had been served and life could continue. Thomas sat with his family around the central fire. The girls were tired, leaning against Aita and each other, but peaceful. The tension that had lived in their shoulders for months had finally released. "What happens now?" Mika asked. It was the first question she'd spoken all day. "Now we live," Aita said simply. "We plant gardens. We learn skills. We grow. We remember those who cannot be here, and we live in a way that honors them." "And Thomas will leave sometimes," Kaya added. Not accusatory, just stating fact. "Yes," Thomas said, "for work, but I'll always come back. This is home." "Promise?" Mika's voice was small. "I promise." Thomas met her eyes, saw trust there, saw belief, saw everything he'd spent 7 years thinking he didn't deserve. "I'll always come back." Red Skywalker stood, calling for attention. The community quieted. "We have among us people who have suffered much," the old man said, "who have lost family, lost homes, lost innocence. But they have also found strength, found courage, found each other." He looked at Thomas. "And they have found that family is not just blood. It is choice. It is standing together when the world pushes us apart." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. "So tonight we honor them. We honor their survival. We honor their refusal to become what the world tried to make them. We honor their humanity." He raised a cup. Others followed. A toast to survival, to justice, to family in all its complicated forms. Later, as the fire burned low and families drifted to their homes, Thomas walked with Aita toward their cabins. "Grey Wolf would have been proud," Aita said quietly, "to see his daughters safe, growing, living without fear." "I wish I could have known him." "You do know him. His courage lives in Kaya, his kindness in Mika, his spirit in both."
She paused at her door. "And Thomas, you should know something." "What's that?" "He would have called you brother, would have trusted you with his children's lives. There is no higher honor in our tradition." Thomas felt his throat tighten. "Thank you." "No, thank you." She touched his arm gently. "You gave us a future when we had none. That debt can never be repaid, but it can be honored by living well, by remembering, by being family." She went inside, leaving Thomas alone with the night. He looked up at the stars, the same stars that had watched them struggle across Ridge Pass 3 months ago. But they looked different from here, kinder somehow. Or maybe it was just that he was different now. He thought about Sarah and Emma, about the family he'd lost. For 7 years, their memory had been nothing but pain. But tonight, for the first time, he could remember without it destroying him. Could hold their memory alongside his new reality and find that they fit together somehow. Sarah would have liked Aita, he thought. Would have taught Kaya and Mika alongside Emma. Would have been happy that Thomas had found his way back to living. The cabin door opened behind him. Kaya stepped out, wrapped in a blanket against the cooling air. "Couldn't sleep?" Thomas asked. "Too much in my head." She came to stand beside him. "Thomas, can I ask you something?" "Always." "When you lost your family, how did you keep going?" Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "Honestly, I didn't for a while. I hid, ran away from everything. It wasn't until you knocked on my door that I remembered how to be human again." "So we saved you too?" "Yeah, you saved me too." Kaya nodded slowly. "My father used to say that we save each other, that no one makes it through winter alone. I think he was right. I think he was too." They stood together in comfortable silence, looking at the stars. Uncle and niece in all but blood. Family in every way that mattered. "Tomorrow I want to start those shooting lessons," Kaya said. "Real ones, like you promised." "Tomorrow we start," Thomas agreed. "But not because you need to run anymore. Because skills matter. Because being capable matters." "I know," she smiled. "But also because it's something we can do together, and I like that." "Me too." Kaya went back inside, leaving Thomas alone again, but not lonely. Never lonely anymore. He looked toward the north, toward where Ridge Pass stood invisible in darkness. Thought about the journey that had brought them here. Thought about Joseph Blackfeather, frozen in the pass, his sacrifice buying them the future they were now living. "We made it, Joseph," Thomas whispered to the night. "We made it through winter, and spring is here now. We're going to be all right." The wind carried his words away into darkness. And tomorrow, Thomas Reed would wake in a home he'd built with his own hands, surrounded by a family he'd chosen and who'd chosen him back, ready to start work as a deputy marshal, protecting the people and land he'd come to love. Winter had tested them. Winter had nearly broken them. But they'd survived. And survival, Thomas was learning, was just the beginning. The real work was what came after. Building, growing, living in a way that honored both the dead and the living. Living in a way that made the crossing worthwhile. He looked one last time at the stars, then turned toward his cabin. Toward warmth and rest and the promise of tomorrow. Behind him, smoke rose from chimneys throughout the community. 40 families. Hundreds of stories. All of them part of the larger story of survival and hope, and the stubborn human refusal to let winter have the final word. Spring had come,
and with it the future they'd fought so hard to reach. Thomas Reed closed his cabin door, banked the fire for the night, and lay down in his bed. For the first time in 7 years, he slept without nightmares. Outside, the world turned toward summer. Inside, a man who'd lost everything had found something new. Not a replacement for what was gone. Nothing could replace Sarah and Emma. But something equally real, equally valuable. A second chance. A family. A home. And that, in the end, was more than enough. It was everything.